Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Planning Committee of the Bellingham City Council. Serving with me on the committee is Councilmember Dan Hamel and Councilwoman April Barker. We have one item today. It's the consideration of draft ordinance for the city's proposed update of the critical areas ordinance. Steve.
Good morning. Thank you, Gene. Steve Sundin, Planning Department. Last time we met, December 7th, we had a work session and we kind of went through what we felt like were the last remaining issues. The biggest thing that we talked about was essentially showing you how the critical area ordinance works and how we expect over time projects to achieve a net benefit, essentially, an ecological function. And we gave the example of Costco. We went through kind of the nuts and bolts of how that works, and we also gave a couple other smaller examples. And at the end of all that, he directed us to go prepare a draft ordinance, which we've done, and so that's included in the packet. And just a couple other things that we wanted to draw your attention to, actually things that you asked us to look into, we've responded to in the memo. Those are on page 3. But essentially they say that for essential public facilities, and specifically San Juan Boulevard and Cordata Park, you wanted some additional information. And so we have consulted with Public Works for San Juan Boulevard, and we've determined to keep that listed as an essential public facility. While it's not on the TIP, it's in some of the other comprehensive neighborhood plans, so I felt like it was important to retain that. And then the other one has to do with Cordata Park and being specific in terms of whether we meant park or trail and where exactly Cordata Park is and what we meant by that. I would follow up by saying essential public facilities, just so everybody's clear, there's no exemption from environmental requirements. When we say exempt, what we mean is exempt from a full permit process, but not the substantive requirements or the rules that are in the ordinance itself. And agency review and approval is still required also. Army Corps, Department of Ecology, et cetera, Fish and Wildlife, as necessary. So those are the two things that we are essentially responding to. We're telling you with some specificity what we mean by those essential public facilities in the CAO. And then finally, we had neglected to add, consistent with guidance, the estuarine wetlands definition, and as far as those that are included in category 2. So we wanted to be sure to add those. So those are the things that we've clarified, and we're available for questions, both Kim and I, at this point.
Questions? Dan?
Just wanted to clarify on page 3, 16.55.081. It talks about Cordata Park being on the east side and west side. I'm just trying to clarify what those statements are.
Okay. The city recently acquired some property on the east side of Cordata Parkway, and I think on some maps it might be called Cordata Park, but it really hasn't been officially named. So we wanted to make sure that the park that's under development right now and partially finished is that which is on the west side of Cordata Parkway. So it was just a way to distinguish which Cordata Parks. I don't know that it has a formal name yet on the east side, but that is not included in the list of essential public facilities. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. April?
So in reading and looking at I went back and watched all the public hearings and all the meetings to make sure that I was kind of on point here, but I wanted, I guess, to just appreciate the fact of leaving San Juan Boulevard in there. I know the neighborhoods worked really hard on their plans, and I'm glad that we're not changing anything before we go to them to find out if that's something that they would like to change. I did have a question in regards to what seemed to be the most contentious was the downing from 4,000 to 1,000 square feet and allowing that 1,000 not to have the buffers but still having to go through the mitigation process. And I understand that, and I appreciate that the city's wanting that, so we're paying attention to all of those smaller wetlands. My question is that if I were, say, a developer was developing, they met that 1,000 square foot or less, they chose to go to the mitigation bank, or if we end up with this, it sounds like we might have an in lieu process within the city. If they go straight to that, is there a way, if we're not having to do as much work, could that permitting fee be different so that we are at least compromising on the increased impact to the developer's cost?
And I understand what you're asking. That didn't come up as far as distinguishing that from the other exemption permit fee, which is $106 versus $1,063. A couple comments, though, just to kind of fill in the whole story. Sometimes, well, a lot of times those wetlands are on sites with other wetlands, so it's usually not just one small wetland on the property.
So they wouldn't.
So they would have to get a critical area permit anyway. And often, if it is just a small wetland, there's times where on the site the mitigation can occur, so there'd be a mitigation requirement anyway, meaning there might be some times where it is just one wetland under 1,000 square feet and someone wants to use the bank. That's probably more rare than the other situations I mentioned, where there's more wetlands and it would require a critical area permit anyway, or mitigation would occur on site. We didn't contemplate having a different standard for that. That's something that we could look at as far as fees go.
Yeah, and I don't want to slow this process. It was just something I was looking at, and I just was thinking it could be a compromise since those are so rare. But I don't know how the fee process works and if that would get it too much in the minutia. So it was a suggestion. Thank you. That was all my questions.
Dan?
There's been a change to the scoring systems here, and just as an example, section 25, page 22, under wetland buffers, there's just quite a bit of change in terms of how the points are allocated. I'm trying to understand if there's a functional difference in any outcomes as a result of those changes, or if that's the same.
Oh, that's a good question. Well, Department of Ecology, when they were developing this new rating system, and they developed the original one as well, is they did some testing of their new system, and they found that in the spread of Category 1 through 4 wetlands, that it really didn't change that much. There weren't that many more Category 1s or that many more Category 4s. So it didn't have a huge difference. The results weren't hugely different between the two systems.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, is there a motion to approve the draft critical areas ordinance?
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion been made and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries 3-0. Well,
you.
almost 15 minutes. That's
Thank
pretty
you.
good. Thank you. Now, just a question. How long will this update last for before it has to be looked at again?
Oh.
Not that,
Do you want to stay on the council until we do that again?
no.
No. That's a good question. In the next 5 years, Department of Ecology said that they would be taking another look at their guidance. So it's going to be at least 5 years, I would say. This one was a full 10 years in between.
Was it 10 years? Yeah.
Yeah, almost 11. So,
Yeah, that would be interesting because I was wondering about is this appropriate time to continue?
Sure, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Is that I was watching the Planning Commission meeting and the new land use for the comprehensive plan that were coming out, and there was a specific new language that talked about making sure that we're planning for climate change, natural disasters, and then I was interested in if the Department of Ecology has gotten to a point where they're considering wetlands and all of that and not just our shorelines. And so it would be interesting to see if in 5 years they've started to consider the impact on our smaller wetlands.
and I think that's factored in indirectly in the rating, but it will be interesting to see if that is one of the things they consider in the next update.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else? Seeing none, meeting adjourned.